Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody, to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call. Glad to have you today. It's been a couple of weeks since we've actually had a call, so it's actually 3 weeks, I guess, and it's been lots happening, so we're very glad to be getting together, and we're looking forward to a pretty intense fall and 2021, so this call in some ways is to prepare for all that. Very glad to have you on today. The future might look like, and especially what we need to be thinking about as a housing counseling community active in the world of housing and all the issues that you work on. Let's get started quickly just to say we're going to do a quick update on the three on a couple of issues, and then we're going to have three panels. One's going to be the National Housing Policy discussion, and we're going to have a bunch of old friends who've we've worked with in the past and leading thinkers in the field. Some of them you know really well and have been active on these calls, and some of you I'm sure have read their work and read about them. So we have Ibejoki Akinwale from NCRC. We have Lisa Donner from the Americans for Financial Reform. We'll have Lot Diaz from Unidos US, Debbie Goldberg from the National Fair Housing Alliance, and Kirsten Johnson-Obi with NeighborWorks America, and where she goes by KJO. And we'll have the Housing Counseling Agency discussion and facilitated by Ellie, and talking about from a local counseling perspective, David Young from Housing Action Illinois, James Ruddick from Northwest Side Housing Center, Chris Kraymeyer from Beyond Housing, Lou Tisler from National NeighborWorks Association, and Simone Griffin from Home for USA. And then finally, we're going to close out with Andy Buchek and Melody having a conversation about the Congress and the politics of what we're going to have to do this fall in 2021. Many of you probably remember Andy as being one of the long-term lobbying presences in the House and Senate, been really crucial for our work, and works with GreenPath and HPF, and he and Melody will give us a good sense of the landscape. Going to do two really quick updates, not as detailed as we normally do because we don't have that much time, but this is the good news section of our discussion. So let's start out with Melody. There's good news around the THUD numbers, the appropriations in the Senate. What's the story?
Thank you, Bruce. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. So I'm really excited for this webinar today. The really big update that I just want to give a huge shout out to the housing counseling agencies and groups in Alabama for this. Senator Shelby, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee, published the various bills for funding for FY 2021. So we know that we passed the House, housing counseling passed the House at $75 million. And many advocates were sort of pessimistic about what the numbers would be out of the Senate, because for the last few funding cycles, we've been hovering at $45 million. So we're very, very excited to see that the numbers coming out of the Senate right now for discussion for approach is at $53 million. This is a huge, huge, huge win, because the higher the Senate number, the higher we can expect the final number out of conference to be when they negotiate and try to reconcile the two bills. So huge thanks to Alabama groups. We had great calls with Alabama groups, and Chairman Shelby's, I want to say Chief of Staff or Legislative Director, across several months now, going into last year and this year. And we think we really made an impact because he was able to understand just how big a lift it was for Alabama groups absent funding. So we're really, really excited about this, and we hope that we can continue on this trend of higher numbers out of the Senate. We still have a long way to go, and when the portion of the webinar comes to me and Andy, we'll probably more deep dive into this. But overall, we're really grateful for this number. Bruce and I plan to send Thank yous to both the Senate Appropriations Chair as well as the Senate T-Head of Approps, which is Senators Collins, who won her reelection, and Senator Reid. So we're really excited about that figure. And just on a personal note, you guys may have known me for 2 years now as Melody Emo. And I'm very, very happy with my BBO surname, but I just got married, yay. So I'm officially Melody Zimmerman now. Woot to me. I hope to change my email address in the upcoming days and weeks. But for now, my email address is the same at mimoh@hsgcenter.org. But I just want to let people know that if you see a different name, it's still me, Policy and Program Director. So I would say those are two big updates for now.
So congratulations, Melody. We're all pretty thrilled. It's very, very nice. So Melody Zimmerman from now on. Cool. So we're going to move forward on the agenda, and we're going to start with our first panel on the National Housing Policy discussion. And I invite the panelists to join and turn on their webcams. And kind of how it'll work procedurally is we have one question. It's kind of an opening question to give everybody a chance to say a few words from their perspective, and then we'll go in, and it will be open to taking calls from people or putting information into the chat box, and we'll then have a discussion around the topics that you all want to raise. But I think this is an opportunity to talk to some of the leading thinkers about the housing work that we do and how we can intersect with the important policy work that they do around the country and in many of the institutions that we work with. So good chance here. Thank you everybody for joining us. And so I hear somebody's dog. Not a problem. That's the way these things work. We love all that stuff. So let me just start off with a basic question. So what we're going to do is ask each of you to just say what you want to tell the housing counseling community, those of us who are working in the field, about what we should think about in the new political landscape, with what we should think about for this fall and for going into 2021. And it's a broad open question, and I think many of you come from different perspectives, and we're very interested in hearing as much of that as we can. So let me start out with Ibijoke Akambwale from NCRC. So Ibijoke, you're up.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you all for having me participate on today. I think one thing I'm really interested in sharing with the community is that this is a really good time to strengthen our voice as a housing counseling field and share our great work and expertise with the Biden-Harris administration. I mean, if we look at the work that we did collectively to help folks recover from the 2008 crises, a lot of experts are suggesting that we'll need that same level, if not additional, to help Americans overall recover from the coronavirus pandemic. And so that's something that we should really be considering because we are smaller as a field. And with that, there's certainly some considerations in terms of being flexible in your programs to respond to what really has become quite the crises for renters. I think that a top priority that we are anticipating from a change in administration is really going to be a robust and bold recovery package that includes some solutions for renters comparable to what we've seen in the streamlined forbearance approach for homeowners. So it's really going to be critically important that we are educating folks about our work. We've seen a lot of housing counseling support, especially around some of the bills from Senators Mendez and Brown and the HEROES Act, but we really need to be able to be responsive as a field by training up our staff and being flexible in our design and approach and working really closely to communicate our capacity to serve and deliver and support folks during this COVID period.
Thank you. Excellent. So let's go to Lisa Donner, the Director of Americans for Financial Reform, a leading organization around financial reform issues, but also working with a broad coalition of housing advocates, legal services, housing counseling agencies, labor, and consumer groups. Lisa.
Thanks for having me be part of this conversation today. I would echo a couple of things that you just heard about the even greater than usual importance in this moment of you all as counselors bringing your voice to the conversation in Washington, not just around housing counseling per se, but also, although that is important, but also about what you learn in your engagement with your clients and others in the housing world in your communities about what are barriers to homeownership and barriers to stable housing, and what are policy and practice changes that would address them. I think that voice is incredibly important. I'd say that in the likely world we are facing of a Democratic president and administration and a Republican or very, very closely divided Senate, the role of the regulators and the kind of, and in housing, the huge quasi-governmental entities, the GSEs, is going to be particularly important. And in some ways, that means there's more space on housing than on some other things because there so much happens in those spaces. So I think that's a really important set of structural opportunities to think about. And then just some specific places where I think your voices and perspectives are particularly important. I think really seizing on the opportunity created by the overdue attention to structural racism and discrimination and the uprisings that have pushed for that attention is an opportunity to be ambitious in pushing for really addressing the homeownership gap and thinking about what really will make a difference in opening up homeownership to more people of color and to more low and moderate income people generally. Really important. Thinking about, the structural barriers that continue to get in the way of that, including problems with credit reporting, including, and this is something we pay attention to, private equity swooping in and buying houses rather than first-time home buyers being able to buy them, taking them out of the stock for first-time home ownership. Thinking about what do we do about the fact that we have incredibly low interest rates right now? How do we have the communities that we care about be able to take advantage of that rather than kind of giant corporate potential owners and real estate interests? I think two other not only about housing things that your voices are potentially particularly important contributors to a conversation about. One is, I think, for the same reasons that regulatory responses on housing are going to be a place to make things happen. The possibility of student debt cancellation through executive action is one of the most exciting opportunities that we and many others are thinking about for a new administration, because that is something that administration can do through executive authority. And I think your perspective on the burden that student debt places on people's ability to take the step of homeownership is an incredibly important contribution to that conversation. And I think there's going to be a lot of attention to climate change and resiliency and fighting climate change in connection with housing as well. And your voices will be incredibly important in focusing on solutions that really do help low and moderate income homeowners rather than taking advantage of them. So I'll stop there.
Excellent, thank you. And so Lot Diaz from Unidos US. Can't hear you, Lot.
Yeah, I got you. Sorry. Typical unmute yourself question. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to join you all. And there was a good compendium of issues that have already been said, so I won't repeat them. But other than to underscore the importance of storytelling, what's happening with your clients to local legislators and in your states and localities, just to make sure they understand the difficulties that families are confronting. And then secondly, the importance of rental counseling and even in some cases foreclosure counseling It was mentioned that staffs are down, a lot of talent has left the field. We see it in our networks a lot, and so we're having to re-emphasize our agency's capacity to build rental counseling as a service line in their agencies, because many of them don't have it, and to strengthen their foreclosure. So it's a really important thing for almost all communities to kind of put a lot of attention to. We are doing that. And then probably all the governmental agencies, new appointments are going to be critical. We'll go into that. The one thing I would mention, though, for those of you who have DACA clients, Biden has expressed his intention of doing an executive order to provide stability to DACA residents in this country, which with FHA will open up the ability to borrow there for those individuals. So it's something to keep in mind of. That might be a change coming out. I don't know how quickly, who knows how this thing's going to work out in the next 6 months, but it's something we're looking forward to, and we'll be advocating on that as well. And I'll just leave it at that for right now.
Excellent, thank you. And so Debbie Goldberg from the National Fair Housing Alliance. Debbie.
Great, thank you. And thanks to Bruce and NHRC for inviting me to be part of this conversation today. I want to underscore what all my fellow panelists have said and completely agree with all those points. There were 3 things that I wanted to focus on in my couple minutes here to get us started. And kind of an underlying theme for me is that housing counselors, you all are really kind of eyes and ears on the ground to tell us about what's really going on in the communities that you work in and what's happening to the people that you work with, and how well they're doing in navigating the housing market, whether that's on the rental side or on the home ownership side. We have a big emphasis in our shop on looking at home ownership and a big concern about closing the racial home ownership gap and the racial wealth gap that goes along with that. So one of the things that we will be very focused on in the short run, and hope that you all will be supportive of, is rebuilding some of the infrastructure and some of the tools at HUD that help us to fight housing discrimination, including kind of most immediately HUD's disparate impact rule, which helps to root out the more hidden kinds of discrimination in the housing market, and also HUD's affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which is really aimed at investing in neighborhoods that have been disinvested over so many years and expanding housing opportunities for people in a wider range of neighborhoods, and really giving people choice and good choices about where to live. Those are 2 things that the Trump administration has taken away from us, and we are looking to see those be put back in place muy pronto, right? And really day one or first 100 days in the new administration. A second thing I would just focus on is what I see as sort of the danger points ahead in the mortgage market. In the foreclosure crisis a decade ago, we relied way too heavily on the assurances of the mortgage servicing industry that they had it all under control, which they clearly did not, as you all know probably better than almost anybody out there. And I think we need to both be trying to avoid getting into the same kind of trouble now, but also making sure that the systems are really in place to help homeowners as they exit forbearance and need to work with their mortgage companies to achieve some kind of long-term solution, with their homes and with their mortgages. And we need to start doing that now. Not waiting until we are, in the midst of a crisis. And in that regard, I would just say that there are 2 principles that I think should guide the policies and programs that are put in place. One is preserving homeownership, and the second is stabilizing neighborhoods. I don't think either of those really guided the work that was done 10 years ago. And then the third thing I'll just say real quick is looking forward. I think, again, echoing my co-panelists here, that we have the opportunity to really think big and to kind of build on, no pun intended here, the Biden's ambition of rebuilding the middle class, right? Build back better. We want to rebuild the middle class. We've done this before. But we did it for white families and not for everybody. And I think we need to really be looking at developing the tools that are necessary to rebuild the middle class, using home ownership as one prong of that, right? But do it in a way that's really fair and equitable, and that opens that up to everybody in this country, not just to white families. And two things that we're going to focus on as a piece of that, there are only two out of a much larger agenda or menu. One is the use of special purpose credit programs under a provision of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So these are programs that allow lenders to really serve the needs of folks who have not been able to qualify for credit or have qualified on terms that are less favorable under their existing programs. And the second is really looking at the tech field and greater tech equity, and using technology actually to eliminate bias in the kind of tech systems that guide decision-making in the credit field, in the credit industry, so that we make more equitable access to credit for people instead of the systems that we have now. So I will stop with that.
Thank you, very helpful. I just underline that one of the problems in the tech world and with technology today is that a lot of the assumptions that have to do with structural racism are embedded in those supposedly objective, supposedly neutral materials. And so NAFA is doing some excellent work at trying to pioneer how to eliminate those pieces, and it's credit scores, it's lots of things that are tied into our work. Thank you. So, and then Kirsten Johnson-Obi from NeighborWorks America.
Hi, everyone, or Keijo, as Bruce said, I go by. If you ever hear that, that's who I am. Thank you for having me join you this afternoon with such a great panel. Like so many of the panelists today, and we've obviously talked about a range of subjects. I'm going to add just a couple more things to the range. Obviously, NeighborWorks is broadly concerned about everything going on in the pandemic and reacting to the needs and trying to help our network with sustainable, affordable housing in real deep economic crisis. And then we learned a lot in the last crisis. I don't think that we thought we would have to start using that knowledge so quickly after the recovery from 2008 on. But in the counseling space, we're really focused on four things that I want to talk about. One that echoes, and so I won't spend a lot of time, but lifting and increasing minority home ownership. We have great programs that I think we can learn from, build on. The lift down payment assistance, financial capability, and pre-purchase counseling are things that we're going to continue to try to lift up in the national, local, and regional conversations that are going on how to build and build wealth and bring equity to a space that has not had it. Secondly, we are preparing ourselves and the counseling community to be prepared for more foreclosure and rental eviction crisis counseling, right? I mean, we don't know what the demand for the services will be exactly, but we know that they're going up. All the surveys we're getting from our network are telling us that, not just what we're hearing everywhere, but what we're actually pulling in to understand. So we need to strategize and build our contingency plans thinking ahead. Thirdly, and this is a little bit of a, you got to eat your vegetables, people, we have to keep our eye on the counseling certification issue. We have a deadline. August 1 seems like a long time from now, but it really isn't. Although we made great progress prior to the last deadline, we are very focused to not only bring the network, but the industry up and get all of our counselors certified by that August 1 deadline. So we're, as we've pivoted our training to virtual training, we're adding place-based trainings, things that can help people pass that test so that we don't have to worry about that aspect of counselors being ready to serve in crisis. And then, fourth, and this is a big one, of course, we're continuing to want to be there to resource our network. We're watching very carefully the CR, what we hope will be omnibuses. I like the way you talk about, bigger numbers in a conference agreement. I sure hope that's the case because we liked our House numbers a lot better than our Senate numbers. But, the demand will be there, and so we need to have the resources. We are also, of course, watching what could be potential creation. I won't say exactly recreation because it will be different if it is created, a new counseling NFMC-like program that NeighborWorks might run. There have been a number of different options and variations on the theme. But if it were to come to happen, that means, of course, then we have to build a program, staff it, and sort of plan for the future in that regard. I am the first one at NeighborWorks, and you can ask anyone there. I don't count your chickens until they're signed into law, but if it happens, I think we are ready, and we will be ready to serve and partner with both our national partners, but also with our folks on the ground. So those are the 4 I'll stick to for my brief time, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Sounds excellent. So let me just remind everybody, please put your thoughts or questions into the chat box or raise your hand, and we'll try to get a couple voices in here. We have a few minutes to take, about 10 minutes or so that we can spend on this. So let me just check in quickly with Melody. Do we have anybody in the chat box right now? If not, I can ask.
I had to unmute myself. Right now, I think the question that would be helpful for discussion would be that it was mentioned that housing counseling agencies learn on the ground. And this, well, sorry, forgive me. It's important to mention what housing counseling agencies learn on the ground. And this is particularly important for lawmakers on the federal level, but I would say throughout all levels of government, since a lot of changes can also happen on the state level as well. To the entire panel, do any of you have examples of how housing counseling agencies have impacted policy, or this info that they're learning in real time has impacted policy, particularly this year?
This is Lot. This is in California. Our affiliates there collaborate with a lot of folks to push housing policy issues in that state around both rental and foreclosure. That it wouldn't have happened unless they raised that voice. And it was policy changes around treatments, obviously, around moratoriums and the like. And obviously they're starting the platform for the new administration and this coming fiscal year. So in certain localities where we have a concentration of affiliates like California, the policy voice is being lifted much greater than I've seen in past years, and it's been really good to see.
Go ahead, Debbie.
So I would add 2 things. One of them might be, I don't know, Lisa's. So one is just to say that in the kind of subset of the housing counseling space of folks who work with clients whose preferred language is not English, that housing counseling agencies have been really extremely helpful in lifting up the problems that those borrowers face, either at the mortgage origination side of things or later on in the servicing side. And there's been an ongoing effort across, I think, all of our agencies and others to really push for both better protections and better resources for those borrowers. That's an ongoing effort that ranges from, getting documents translated into multiple languages, where we've really made a certain amount of progress, not enough, but we actually have made some significant progress to, better enforcement on the kind of on the back end. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I will say is that, the survey that many of you, I think, responded to that NHRC put out about what's actually going on right now. What do borrowers understand about the options available to them? Do people know that they can get a forbearance? And if they don't know, why is that? Or if they know but don't take it, why is that? That survey has been extremely influential in conversations with policymakers across the government, right? And helping them understand the gaps that exist and the steps that are needed to plug those gaps to make sure that borrowers out there understand that there is, protection available for them and what they need to do to take advantage of that. So I think that's another place where the counseling field has been very, very influential.
Yeah, I would echo both of those and just tag on one piece to the second, which is to say, it seemed to me that the perspectives that housing counselors shared about the failures of the response to the last housing crisis were an incredibly important component of what progress we did make in, pushing for improvements to that response over time. The big picture is that a bunch of the changes that you and we all advocated for didn't happen, but I think that long ago work has prepared the ground much better for people's willingness to hear and listen and want to do something different this time as we think about as the government thinks about the situation of homeowners and renters in this economic crisis. And I think, what you know about what people are experiencing and what is working and what isn't, and what's happening on the ground will be even more valuable, or even more able to impact change this time. It was valuable last time.
I would just quickly add that every national organization or advocacy group is submitting recommendations for the transition team, and it really is the on-the-ground experience from the counselors, and they're working with clients and using that invaluable feedback that's going to help support some of the upcoming policy that we'll be looking forward to in our supportive efforts for the field. So it really is not, without hearing those stories, there's not much of an influence that your national partners are able to make. So we really do need those stories and your feedback about what's working, what you guys are doing differently on the ground, and what pockets of information you guys are seeing. I mean, it really is only because of your efforts that we know about the boost, boom, and pre-purchase. I mean, I can't tell you how many counseling agencies I've talked to that have said, our clients are just, they're buying homes. Our home buyer education has increased so much. That's something that we wouldn't be able to have a national perspective on if it wasn't for the local folks.
Yeah, and I just want to briefly add, because I know I'm going to say something different, I swear, other than adding, in 2008, or before 2008, really, the counseling community was the canary in the coal mine, telling policymakers what was going on. It is happening again. We've learned how to harness that and to use the surveys that we're putting out our network, sharing those with the policymakers, both our regulatory board, as we have a different board, and also other folks who are asking and interested. So that's really important. And I think a real tangible right now is a partnership that's formed with counseling orgs, and NeighborWorks was at the table creating the Not Okay, That's Okay campaign, which is really now trying to pick up the folks who have not gone in for their forbearance, who could be doing it. And if it's, if it's 10 people, it's a problem, but it could be 400,000 people who have not exercised that right. And so a whole campaign got launched on Tuesday, and in partnership, trying to bring people to their counseling agencies. So I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that if they had not heard it.
Thank you for that. We have a lot of questions flooding in. And I think this question, I'll start with this question because it's very housing counseling specific. This came from, girl, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name, Karen Hoshnet Yetman. Sorry about that. She says the additional funding is needed and great to see, but recruiting new employees is a challenge right now. She said that she had an open position advertised for a month and only received 7 resumes. So she's asking, what can housing counselors do as an industry to attract new employees and to consider housing counseling as a career?
So we're actually doing some real work on this, and many of you have been participants in this, and Housing Action Illinois has had a leadership role in this as well, and all the training organizations have been part of these discussions. So we're really trying to develop a more career path orientation to housing counseling, and recruit people and recruit them really to take the certification test, to train them quickly around the certification test, and then open them up into the marketplace, so that we're really developing a new core of people. We have, I mean, in fact, after the end of NFMC funding, we had a major contraction of housing counseling organizations and of staffing levels, and we've really got to rebuild this. One thing we're thinking a lot about, and we could use your help on, we're also very interested in rebuilding in a way that retains the kind of depth of diversity in race and ethnicity, but also in age, in kind of background. In one of the strengths of our business in the past has always been that we really do represent the communities we serve, and we've got to make sure that when we're rebuilding like this, we've got to be able to get to that place again. I think there's lots of opportunity here. It's probably really only going to get off the ground in 2021, but we'll see if we can get something going earlier. But it's definitely critical work for us, and I hear that from a number of organizations that we get it. Can we take one more quick one here?
Sure. Let me see. well, this probably is also maybe a policy question, but if a homeowner does not act on the CARES Act options after December 31st, are they out of luck? What does this mean for housing counselors?
Somebody want to tackle this? We don't have the tools. Essentially, we need a major stimulus bill. We need a bill that will do deep subsidies on people's on rent, and that will help us, protect the people we're working with. There is just a huge human rights crisis that's on the verge. It's a disgrace that it hasn't happened so far, and there's a lot of time to do it. Fortunately, there does seem to be some momentum in the Senate, which has always been a stumbling block. And we have a challenge in when forbearance comes to an end, that some of the tools are probably going to work just fine for people, but certainly for people whose incomes have not been, when they go back to work, it's not the same as where they were when they qualified for the mortgage originally. Those people are going to be in trouble, and we know that that's going to be part of it because businesses are not up to speed as much as they were in the past in terms of the recovery. And so both those areas need deep subsidy. We want protections. We want to extend on the moratorium and on forbearance, but it's also critical that we end up with a solution that doesn't have people unnecessarily losing their houses because they were just caught up in a COVID-19 pandemic.
So this is Ellie. Hi, I want to just let you know somebody does have their hand raised and would like to speak. So I'd like to reward that bravery and unmute them. Right. It's Deborah Moore. I'm going to unmute you. And you have to unmute yourself as well, Deborah. You are self-muted. Deborah Moore. Go for it, Deborah.
Hi. I really didn't have a question. I thought it said not a question. I was making a comment about the lack of housing counselors, and I wanted to remind us that a lot of the housing counselors came from unemployed loan originators and real estate agents.
Well, that's a good point. I think another place where we could recruit is from our client ranks. That you see some talent coming through here from the communities we serve, and we should think about, can we, are there people there who would do this well? And maybe they have a different job and we should just recruit them in. But you are seeing hundreds, and many of your organizations seeing several thousand people in a year. Let's think of if that's a place we can recruit from as well. But yeah, recruiting from the existing financial services industry. I think one of the things I really want us to think about is how to recruit with a sense of mission. That your strength out there is not just that you have a job and you're out there to close a deal. Your strength is that you are doing this because you have some sense that that the communities that we serve, that the world has not been fairly treating large populations, and we can make a difference here. And that kind of sense of urgency and some sense of advocacy is an important part of our work. And I want to make sure that when we're hiring, we have people who really think about it with a sense of mission. Before we step away, just one quick thing around the Community Reinvestment Act. Does anybody want to say a quick word about some thoughts there?
I'll jump in. We're preparing at NeighborWorks to do a comment letter to the Federal Reserve's ANPR, the Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. I think it was important before the election. Now I think it's even more important because it could be an opportunity for bringing the regulators together on a proposal that will be a lot more hear better what the communities need and financial institutions can do. So we're pretty excited about that. Not that I'm excited about writing another comment letter. I'm sure none of us are. But and this is a big one, but we've got till February 16th, I think, to do that. So,
well, I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't mention CRA coming from NCRC, and so I'm hoping that most of you are part of our listservs and see the work that we've been doing in our various comment letters and filings in support of improvements to the Community Reinvestment Act. And so we're more committed now than ever to our continued advocacy on this front and issue. And so for folks that have questions about it, we are doing our listserv and our weekly reports out on this information. You can definitely continue to keep in contact with us on this issue. We are very active on it.
And I would just add, if we have one more minute, that, you know, we're also looking, I think all of us, again, looking at the Fed's rulemaking here. And, you know, what we see is an opportunity to be, I would say, more race conscious in the way that CRA gets enforced. I think too often we think if we you know, solve the barrier, you know, the problems that create barriers for low and moderate income families, that then that is kind of going to achieve an equitable solution from a racial perspective or a race and national origin perspective. And in fact, that doesn't work that way, at least not nearly as well as you know, we might like to think. And certainly we have mounting and ever-growing evidence that communities of color at all income levels are not well served by the market, you know, as it's currently operating. And CRA ought to be a tool that can help, you know, change that, so that we really do get better access to home ownership, better access to credit for people of color, low and moderate income people certainly, but, you know, others who may not fit in that category, but also face barriers. And so we're looking at pushing the regulators to revamp the way they approach CRA to be more equitable in that way.
I know NCR is doing that as well.
This is Melanie. We have two more questions that came in that I think are really relevant to the discussion.
We're going to have to pivot. We're about to lose some of our other panelists.
Oh Lord,
So,
sorry.
Right. So I think we're going to have to say this is it. Obviously, more discussions to come in the future. Let's move very quickly to our second panel, and Ellie will convene that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So if the second panel could come on, I see people starting to pop on. Simone, I think, is the last person we're waiting for.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. All right. So hi, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. So this panel is really going to focus on the specifics with what matters most to housing counseling agencies. I do want to just say out loud, thank you to Debbie Goldberg for bringing up the survey that we did. And thank you to all the housing counselors that answered that survey. A little over 100 of you answered it, and you know, I'll echo again what Debbie and a few of the other panelists said, that it was incredibly impactful. I continue to hear from CFPB about it and from other policy folks about it. So those surveys really do mean a lot. I know we tend to send out a lot of them, but they do have an impact. And so I encourage groups to continue answering those. So with that, I am going to get started with this panel and remind everybody to put your questions in the chat box. And if you want to raise your hand at the end, we'll unmute you and let you speak. So the question that the panelists are going to start out answering is, what do you think is the most important thing for housing counseling agencies to be paying attention to as we move into 2021? And we're going to go ahead and get started with David Young from Housing Action Illinois. David.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Bruce and Ellie, for including me as a panelist. I'm going to talk a little bit about some studies that were done in Illinois, but I think that this data can probably be found in other states, and that organizations can use this to make some decisions about what they're doing in other states as well. But recently, the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University in Chicago did some maps looking at renter and owner households who are working in vulnerable occupations that are housing cost burdened. And they used some 2018 data. I did send to Ellie the links to the maps. So hopefully, Ellie, if you were able to put those up, and then people would be able to access those. But I thought that in getting this information at this point was very timely, because even though this information is based on 2018 data, I think it gives us a really good idea of what to expect for 2020 as well as 2021. And so, for example, in on the owner-occupied households, based on the 2018 information in Northern Illinois and in one of the counties that has a huge manufacturing base, it's expected that more than 30% of the owner-occupied households are working in vulnerable occupations that are also housing cost burdened. If there continue to be layoffs in those occupations, those numbers are going to go up. And so I think that for housing counseling organizations, what is helpful is they can use this mapping to pinpoint in their service areas where they should be doing some marketing, where they should be doing some outreach, so that they can help out homeowners as well as renters before they get to crisis stage. Oftentimes we know we have consumers that are coming to us and saying, I just got the foreclosure notice, or I just got the eviction notice, what can I do? But if we can use tools like DePaul has produced to help us see where these issues are, we have an opportunity of reaching out to those families before we get to crisis mode and to help them to avoid those messy situations. So I see that Ellie was unable to put those links in the chat box, and I will put those two links in the chat box for people to be able to see. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about that. But that's really what I wanted to talk about today.
Great. Thanks, David. Next, we're going to go to James Ruddick. James.
Thanks so much, Ellie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here with you all and see you, especially as we're in these really uncertain times. And so my name's James Ruddick. My pronouns are he and him. I work at Northwest Side Housing Center. We're a local housing counseling agency in Chicago, Illinois. And when I was thinking about the answer to the question of what's really important for us to pay attention to, the first thing that came to mind was, and I think folks on the first panel talked about this a little bit, was thinking through the intersections of race and housing counseling, particularly the new administration. And in their speeches over the weekend, I heard the president-elect acknowledge systemic racism, and I think that's a really important thing for us to think through as we think about closing the racial wealth gap, as we think about protecting the Community Reinvestment Act, that we now are in a time where our government is acknowledging systemic racism. And I think us as housing counseling agencies have an opportunity and, dare I say, an obligation to do the same and to push the financial services industry to change the way that they do business. We all play a role in this ecosystem, and I really do think that it's dependent on us on the ground, on the front lines, to call out the financial institutions, on the banks, on their bad behavior. Just recently, we had Chase release a report in the Chicagoland area that something like less than 1% of all of their loans went to people of color in 2020. Unacceptable. And we need to, as an industry, be calling that out and standing up against practices and institutions that are not driving racial equity, especially in this time. In addition to that, and I know again that Lot and others had mentioned this, rental counseling. We are seeing an increased number of renters that are living in precarious and unstable situations. Some of those are tenants of individual landlords of 2, 3, 4 unit buildings who are relying on those tenants for their mortgage. So we're seeing that this is cyclical in nature and that it doesn't just impact renters, but also impacts homeowners and home buyers, and that it's also a foreclosure prevention tool to help support renters. Yet that hasn't been something that most of the foreclosure prevention oriented agencies have focused on. So I think thinking through that and how do we support an increase in rental counseling and direct support and assistance for renters is something that we should all be thinking about. What are trainings, technical assistance, HUD appropriations, allocations, all for rental counseling. Lastly, two more things. So lastly, thinking through alternative non-government funding revenue streams. In the state of Illinois, we have the Foreclosure Prevention Program, or FPP dollars, and that's funded through foreclosure filing fees. And so just thinking through creatively, how do we not only rely on HUD and on the government, but on others to support our work? And I think because of the situation we're in and the impact that COVID-19 is having on everyone and the new administration, we should just be thinking through how to leverage private resources to increase our impact. And then lastly, and we talked a little bit about this on the first panel, thinking through potential challenges of the low interest rates in the market right now and making sure that there are regulations and that we're holding the CFPB and other regulators accountable to make sure that these low interest rates and the increase in home buying is not a tool for gentrification, and that we're not displacing particularly low-income Black and brown families out of homes and communities unintentionally, of course, by promoting more home buying, again, whether that's correspondent or investor related lending. We want to make sure that folks have an equal opportunity and chance to buy homes. And I think as housing counseling agencies, down payment assistance and other programs and counseling are that opportunity. So those are what comes to mind and what's on our agenda in the coming months and years. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Ellie.
Thanks, James. Just to let everybody know, if you see James disappear from the screen, it isn't because he doesn't like us. He does have something else going on at 2 o'clock, but he was gracious enough to squeeze us in so that we could hear from him. So thank you, James. Our next speaker is Chris Kremeyer. Chris.
Thanks, Ellie. First, yes to what James said, all of that, and to David. But I want to focus on is something pretty pragmatic, and we just need more resources to hire staff and to do this work. And I really want to harken back to the first panel about relationship building with elected folks in DC, both with their staff at the local level, their staff in DC, and then with electeds as well as you can. And one of the questions in the first panel was, can you give an example of when that kind of advocacy paid off? So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what my friend Lou Tisler and I did over a decade ago at the beginning of NFMC. So when all that was happening on Capitol Hill, Lou and I, this is when Lou was back at the NHS of Greater Cleveland, we were at a NeighborWorks America event in Salt Lake City. And literally the NFMC was coming to the floor of the Senate, and they needed a couple of Republicans to help get it to the finish line. Well, it just so happened that because of years of cultivation and relationship building, Lou knew Senator Voinovich, and I knew Senator Bond really well, and their staff really well. And we spent a lot of time, not just when there were votes, right? Not just when there was a flashpoint, but in between all the time when their staff has time to build relationships, that we talked to their senior staff in DC while they were both, quite frankly, on the floor of the Senate. And we were able to push both their staff to get both senators to get behind NFMC. So we hear a lot about, advocate and build relationships. And I know sometimes it feels like, where does that get us, right? And can I really see change, and can we really impact? Well, again, if these two Republicans who began the move and began the groundswell to get behind NFMC, and then hundreds of millions of dollars later, how many families were helped and how many families stayed in their homes, and what great resources happened kind of all across the country. So again, I would just urge folks that, look, we get weary of feeling like we're forever fighting over crumbs. And the only way to do that is to make sure folks know the importance of our work. What happens when we are successful in either creating a new homeowner or keeping someone in their home? The power of that, and us telling that story about real life people in your congressional district, in your state. So both local staff, DC staff, and the elected understand the unbelievable value it has, not only for that individual family, but for that broader community. So again, I just urge everyone to not just at these flashpoints, right? Here we have this transition. It's going to be exciting, and there's opportunity in transition. Great, let's be there and let's do that and let's push while we have the opportunities. But when things die down a little bit, that's the time when you really can build a relationship, because staffers have more time, that they can learn about your organization, that they can begin to trust you as an advocate and someone who can give them guidance on issues that arise. So if Lou Tisser and I can help raise a couple $100 million, then I'm sure folks listening to the call can get to their electeds, get to their staffers, local and federal, build that relationship, and hopefully one day we won't have to be fighting over crumbs like we usually have to do.
Thanks, Chris. And speaking of Lou Tisler, he's next.
Good afternoon. Again, Bruce, Ellie, thank you so much. In terms of what is the most important thing that housing counseling agencies can do, I would say renew or become a member of NHRC. And I'm not getting free dues for saying that. I'd like to start with a couple things. Is that I think that housing counseling agencies should not get lost in the we need to only focus on those who are very close to becoming a homeowner, and we lose sight of those who are going to take a while to become homeowners. And I think that as we're chasing dollars, a lot of the banks, a lot of others are really incentivizing to just get people right over the finish line. And I think that we need to remember that there's others that need to have a much longer path, and we need to be beside them much longer to make that happen. And to help them get there, we need to all be tested or certified, not so much tested in a COVID way, but on a call. There's 3,100 of 4,060 counselors that have been certified, that have passed the test. That's only 76%. It sounds like August 1st is a long time away. It sounds like at least a year. It's only 262 days from today. I can't say how important. We're very happy that there's going to be a new administration, a new cabinet, et cetera, but that's not going to change the fact that we need to get across that finish line by August 1st. And as we do that, I think that it's important for agencies to try to back away from the competitiveness and poaching within the industry, of being able to pull other housing counselors who have passed the certification test in. As an executive director, I get it. If I'm going to save on training, I'm going to try to hire somebody that's already certified. But we have to be very careful about that poaching and getting into it. And I know that that's not part of the change of the administration, but that's really going to be a change of our culture. And then I would end in terms of looking at hubris and not really getting caught up in that. And to go back to NFMC and, in terms of the work that we did, I just want people to remember that we were very happy when President Obama came in. But I just want to remind people that the last 2 years of the Bush administration, when the NFMC started, it was at $180 million. When President Obama came in, NFMC was funded for $50 million. And that had to be because either Chris and I didn't do our job, or that the industry itself was not able to tell the story. And so I think it continues to be important to tell the story and not take it for granted that, oh, we have a new administration. They're definitely going to see where our heads are and be able to do that. And then I would also add, in terms of where Keijo mentioned the ANPR and the Federal Reserve, we're all going to be very happy once we dive in a little bit deeper of what the Fed is proposing. And a lot of times when we're happy, we don't comment. When we weren't happy with the OCC, we commented like the world was on fire. It's going to be just as important to do that. So when they go to then conference, they don't call it conferencing, but when the Fed and the OCC and the FDIC get together to try to get to a common CRA regulation that all the lenders want to abide by, because nobody wants the OCC to have one, the Fed to have one, and the FDIC to have one. It's really going to be important for counselors to be able to affect investing, lending, and that service. And so again, very important to turn out in terms of that comment. Don't feel that just because you agree that your voice doesn't need to be heard. It's going to be equally as important to be supportive of positive change as it is for the negative change that the OCC did. And I hope with the Fed, whoever they put in place following Mr. Powell, stays just a little bit longer than the previous comptroller of currency when they dropped their crappy CRA, I almost swore, sorry, and go from there. So again, engage, don't poach, pass the test, and write those letters. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Lou, and a special thanks for the NHRC membership plug. Really appreciate that. So we are winding up our panel with words from Simone Griffin. Simone.
Well, hey guys, thank you guys. I'm taking notes. I've really been intrigued by everything that everybody has said so far, so thank you. And I want to really emphasize one of the things that Lou just said, which is to tell our story. That has been one of the goals that Home Free USA is making and doing in 2021. It's specifically to continue elevating our stature, and not just the stature of Home Free USA, but the stature of, our industry, our work, the work that we do. It's incredibly important. We have to continue showing our ROI so that we can eventually be paid equivalent to our contributions, which everybody knows none of us in here are getting paid equivalent to the work that we are doing and to the impact that we're making in and around us. So continuing to tell our story, continuing to elevate our stature is really very important to us in 2021. And I would encourage you guys to pay attention to that as well. Also, the other thing that we're heavily focusing on is the delinquent homeowners with no forbearance or expiring ones. As you guys are seeing, I'm sure, there are so many homeowners right now who are they're not, just like in 2008, they're not opening their mail, they're not paying attention, or they have spoken to their servicer, but they're not following up. And so we're figuring out, well, why is that? And our job is to really, yet again, be the middle ground so that these homeowners do not lose their homes. And you guys know, it's far too easy for that to happen. So we're working with the lenders on non-responsive borrowers and making sure that we get and really understand what the lenders need to say, how they need to say it to get this in. We're also, and that goes into another element that's important, is heightening the servicing relationships. We know that these servicers need to hear from us. They need that. Sometimes they don't think that they do. But when it comes to non-responsive borrowers, which is only going to probably grow in 2021, we know that that is a massive issue. And that is how we're figuring out how we can be of the greatest service. And also, Home Free USA's core client avatar is the Black community on the home buying and the homeowner level. So we are focusing on our core avatar as to how can we be a powerful communicator with the Black community and in terms of homeownership. And I would just encourage you to figure out, if you have not already, who is your core client avatar? And yes, we always want to help everybody, but sometimes we may need to narrow that down to one community and just make sure that your voice is really speaking to that community, because that's going to be incredibly important when you're going out and doing your work. We have also done a lot of focus groups in the last couple of months of non-responsive borrowers to figure out why they aren't responding. We are finding that it's lack of compassion. These lenders, these servicers are speaking from a script, or the clients just don't understand. And so we're trying to, work through that. As you guys know, homeowners are petrified. We are focusing on home buyers, but we are finding that our home buyers are, in good shape. Their biggest issue is being outbid on properties, which is a bit out of our control at this point, but if we can find a way to reshape that conversation, we definitely will. We just see the bigger need right now as homeowners. And then, of course, generally increasing production, increasing referrals, and aligning better on servicing. So we all, again, the final thing is we are continuing to push that we are equal to the for-profit industry and our ability to deliver results, clients, and everything else.
Great, thanks, Simone. So a couple of things that I just want to kind of wrap up with is I love that we had a lot of conversation around the importance of housing counseling agencies really connecting with their lawmakers, whether they're at the federal level, the state level, the local level. I do also just want to acknowledge that I understand that that is often something that ends up on the back burner in our organizations because it's so difficult to meet the funder needs for meeting with clients. But I think that I want to double down on what everybody says to make it very clear that connecting with those people, the lawmakers, is going to have a huge impact on your funding. And we can see it this year just from what came out of the House THUD subcommittee, the $53 million, that is completely related to the relationships that organizations had with their legislators that we were then able to leverage and have conversations with those folks and utilize the housing counseling agencies on those calls. So just want to double down on the importance of that, and thank you all for kind of really bringing that up. I'm going to move over to Melody and let Melody tell us if there's any questions in the chat box.
Yes, we have, hello, we have one question that I think, sorry, I'm having a minor tech issue. Okay, I see it. This question is for David. Are there any updates to the intersection of MISMO and counseling, and how is it intended to be integrated in 2021 that is beneficial to note given exacerbated remote service applications?
Wow, is that a planted question, Ellie and Melody?
It sure ain't.
So where we are now, as far as MISMO is concerned, is earlier this year we released Dataset 1, which are the housing counseling relevant data points that are already included in MISMO. And we are we are in the process of working on Dataset 2, which are the data points that the housing counseling industry considers important in order to show its impacts and outcomes, but are not currently found in MISMO. And with that information, we will put all of those things together and agree on one common data set that will then be submitted to MISMO to go through their change process and included in their residential data dictionary. And so once all of that information is in MISMO, it should make it a lot easier for communication between housing counseling organizations, servicers, and originators, because we are all using MISMO's residential data dictionary as our common language. So one plug that I would like to give right now is we sent out information a couple of weeks ago through NHRC and the Coalition of HUD Intermediaries, asking for people if they had any ideas of data points that we should be including to add it to this template so that we can collect all of that information and put it in Dataset 2. We are, to encourage more people to participate in that, going to offer $25 Amazon gift cards to at least 8 randomly selected submitters to that data template process. So watch out for that. You'll be getting updated information about that, but hopefully that encourages more people to provide information. And then as we have more information, I think that it should help to facilitate better communication amongst all of those organizations. So I hope that I did a somewhat good job of answering the question.
Great, thanks, David. And we are going to wrap up this panel and move on now to the next one, and that means handing it over directly to Melody.
Okay. All right. Hey, everyone. I'm just going to I'm at working from home, obviously, so I need to adjust some things. Oh, goodness, crazy year. So myself and Andy worked together closely on a lot of housing counseling advocacy on Capitol Hill. And we just want to talk a bit about a lot of the victories from this year and what's next that we foresee going into 2021. So Andy, let's talk a little bit about this huge win that I discussed earlier from the Senate bill having $53 million for housing counseling for next fiscal year. Do you want to talk a bit about just to signify how big a deal this is after several years of advocacy before we sort of discuss plans for next year? Sorry, that was my dog.
Absolutely. In the last few appropriation cycles, which happen every year, what's always been sort of the way it's worked out is that the House side has provided a much higher number. And in recent years, the Senate has funded the program, the HUD Counseling Assistance Program, roughly at the president's budget number, which has been somewhere in the neighborhood of $45 million most years. And what that means in practical terms is that when you get a good number out of the House and a lousy number out of the Senate, and they end up splitting the difference between the two, it's been a struggle to hold on to current level funding, much less get the kind of increases that all of our organizations need to perform the services and serve as many people as possible. So raising that baseline up this year from 45 to 53 means that as they negotiate, they're essentially starting at the current level, which obviously means even if they just split the difference in a sort of, unsophisticated kind of way, that could still be as much as $12 million additional funding for the program, which, as everyone knows, means a lot more people get served.
Yeah, and we're really grateful for this. I think that a lot of the success of this new number, this new baseline, the Senate, comes from senators really learning what housing counseling is, as well as hearing directly from practitioners in their state. So Bruce and Andy and I always stress to those on calls that they need to hear directly from housing counselors, and not necessarily from what they may perceive to be beltway talking heads and lobbyists. Although we're all fighting for the same goal, they really think of things as, how does this affect my own districts and communities and states? So we're really grateful for that, and we think we should be doing that going forward. But we still have a huge lift, unfortunately. Obviously, COVID funding is still out there in the ether. We still have to work towards reconciling both bills at the end of the day. What do you perceive to be the potential challenges in 2021 for housing counselors and advocacy that perhaps we didn't have this year or might be a bigger deal next year?
I think there are a couple things that come to mind. First and foremost is that we obviously start with a new Congress. It is a very closely divided Congress.
Yes.
Right now, there are still a few races that haven't been called in the House, but if we sort of look at where things stand and make a couple of educated guesses, it looks like the breakdown of the House is going to be about 223 Democrats to about 212 Republicans, which means that any 6 members on the Democratic side, if they're not on board, a measure would fail. And so it means, I went back and looked, this is the closest that the breakdown in the House has been in about 20 years. And so what the conventional wisdom is, when things are this close and this tight, and we obviously know that the status of the Senate is going to be either one vote, one or two votes, one way or the other at this point. The conventional wisdom is often that very little gets done. And so I went back and looked, and 20 years ago, there was this almost the identical breakdown in the House, and then there was a 50-50 split in the Senate. And for historians that remember 20 years ago, there was an independent in Vermont that switched parties from
Republican to independent caucus with the Democrats. The Democrats had a 1-vote majority in the Senate. That year was the same year that Congress passed No Child Left Behind, the Bush tax cuts, Sarbanes-Oxley, McCain-Feingold, and which is the major campaign finance reform. And so, well, it's certainly not easy to do things when the majorities are so tight and the differences are so obvious. It doesn't mean that nothing gets done.
Right.
And so I would tell everyone, and I would echo what we have heard from different panelists, Chris in particular, about the importance of relationships. Did you lose me?
You're back. We're good.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm sure what I said was brilliant when it got muted.
I'm sure it was.
I heard it. I heard this.
I'm so sorry.
I heard you, Andy. I think that most of us heard you, and it was brilliant. I just want to say that.
No, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Well, that's what I wanted to say, though, is just echo the importance of relationship building and to make sure that as sort of, I just want to talk for a second about how to tell our story, because I agree with everything that's been said about the importance of telling our story and telling individual anecdotes about how we've been able to help homeowners and renters along the way is really important, but also providing data and information about the scope of the service that you're providing in their states and in their districts also goes a long way. All congressional offices do casework. And so when you talk to them about the tens or the hundreds or the thousands of people that your organizations are helping in their states and in their districts, that really gets their attention because those folks know how labor intensive that work is. They know how much is involved in helping people that have those types of problems. And so it helps them understand what it is that we do, and it helps give them some perspective. You know, when you're counseling hundreds of people or thousands of people, that's a new case every day, 5 new cases every day. Those offices start thinking to themselves, oh my God, we'd be overwhelmed if we had to deal with that type of a volume. It helps them appreciate what it is that our folks do and spend so much time working with home buyers, prospective home buyers, renters, in sorting out their financial issues. So it's just, I can't emphasize that enough. And what we have learned over and over again in meetings is the more local the data or the more specific the stories are to those districts, the more people appreciate it. It's the type of thing that they don't get that often from folks who come in and talk with them. They often get sort of broad level data. And if you can sort of narrow it down and pinpoint it to their states and their districts, it is extraordinarily helpful to them.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is one of the strongest ways that practitioners can feel involved, especially in sort of the legislative side of things. But that's not the only significant place that a lot of challenges have been felt. I know that the election was a very tense one, and knocking on wood, Biden is the president-elect and will be inaugurated shortly. But one thing that a lot of housing counseling agencies had to deal with was a lot of the administrative changes. And so let's say Biden does enter the White House next year. What are some things that housing counselors should keep in mind and ways they can be involved in that way, in sort of more the administrative regulatory space?
Well, I obviously think that the Biden administration will be much friendlier towards our organizations and the work that we do. Yes. And I think that it goes a long way in their willingness to listen to us as to what we're seeing on the front lines, as to what are the solutions that we can propose that would help people. Perhaps even more importantly, the outgoing, can I call them that? The outgoing administration has put up a lot of obstacles that might make counselors' jobs more difficult, and highlighting where those exist and what can be done to sort of take those obstacles out of the equation are a really important role for all of our organizations to play. You know, as I mentioned, we do have a really deeply divided Congress. And so while there's a chance for big things to get done, there's also a chance where it can be challenging. But the administration has an awful lot of authority to help in many different ways. And so we need to work with whoever can help us get to the point where we can do a better job of serving people and helping more and more families every day.
Sure. One thing that the NHRC does a lot, as you know, is to partner with sort of state networks. And we have really good relationships in North Carolina, Florida, New York comes to mind. They're very engaged statewide. What do you think of some housing counseling agencies who want to be more involved on the state level because they've sort of given up some focus on the federal side, given the issues around funding? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I certainly do. I mean, I think it's an all of the above approach that states can, in many instances, can be extraordinarily helpful, as can the federal government. And I certainly share lots of the same frustrations that a lot of folks have had in trying to work with the federal government and, you know, get the results that all of our organizations deserve in order to provide the services. And so I would not give up hope on the federal side, but as you move towards the state side, especially one of the biggest challenges, obviously, on the state level are, from a financial standpoint, is that state and local budgets are under enormous strain because of the current pandemic. And as you know, one of the biggest hangups on the Washington side has been additional aid to states and local governments. But should we see some resolution to that, and there are some glimmers of hope that maybe this logjam can get broken and there can be some additional aid, I think working at the state level is important because, as we talked about on the federal side, having policymakers that understand the role that housing counseling organizations can play in helping people navigate some of these new minefields that they're running across as a result of this pandemic is really important. And it may not be something that's right at the top of their mind in terms of where can we turn to get help. And so I think that, you know, working across the state capitals is absolutely a you know, worthwhile endeavor for those organizations that are in the, you know, have the capacity to do so.
Sure. Final question, and I'm going to turn it back over to our amazing executive director. Something that I particularly noticed out of this election, I'm sure a lot of people have this concern, is that while Biden is president-elect, that the country is very much almost split down the middle and sort of separating even further apart politically. One thing that a lot of advocates tell us that they constantly struggle with is how to reach out to Republicans. So we made some really good inroads on the federal level with having 53 million, but just going forward, if let's say we want to increase that to 100 million as it was in the HEROES Act, which did pass the House and is currently sitting somewhere in the Senate, what would you say to that? Are there any ways that people should communicate their work differently, or should they just communicate their work more efficiently or use new words? Like, what would you say to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I feel as though oftentimes, I don't want to use the word afraid, but we're hesitant to go talk to those folks that we think might not agree with us. And what I have found over time is, yes, there are a number of folks that no matter what you say and tell them, they might not be supportive. But more often than not, if you can sort of craft the conversation about what you're doing locally, you get the same sort of interest level, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. And oftentimes, part of the reason why some of those members, especially on the Republican side, are not supportive is that they don't have a real good understanding of the level of work and the amount of services that are being provided in their own districts. And so the more that you can make it about the work you're doing locally in their states and districts, the more likely you are to have a much better conversation with them, and the much more likelihood that they are to sort of, step back and say, hey, wait a minute, this is really important to my constituents. And we've seen that happen over and over again. I mean, Senator Shelby in Alabama is by no stretch sort of,
right?
He's as conservative as they come and sort of has been around for as long as just about anyone in the entire Senate. And so we saw firsthand the impact that hearing from his local groups had on his office and him in terms of the $53 million number that we've talked about today. But it wasn't just him. When we started in the House, we had to do an awful lot of work to make inroads with members on the Appropriations Committee from the Republican side in order to get, and there for a while we were getting just as good, if not better numbers from the Republican House as we were getting from the Democratic Senate. And a lot of that had to do with, we talked with, at the time, he was the chairman of the subcommittee, Congresswoman Maria Diaz-Balart, about the impact that counselors could have in natural disasters and hurricanes, because that was a big deal in his district.
And still is.
We talked with Congressman Dent from Pennsylvania about the great work that the local agencies were doing in the Lehigh Valley, and it gave him a great appreciation for the work that could be done. We did the same thing in Iowa with Chairman Latham and then with Mr. Young, so I would say that, it might be a little more intimidating, but it is certainly worth every ounce of effort that you can put in to go talk to these Republican offices. And you might be surprised. It's not just the, most moderate Republicans that agree with us. Senator Shelby would never put himself on the list of the most moderate Republicans, but yet, after hearing from the local Alabama groups about the great work that they were doing, it was easy for his office to understand why funding that program is important. And I think that that's the real takeaway from it.
Absolutely. And I agree with you on Senator Shelby. You would think he was the toughest nut to crack, but understanding what's going on in his state, I will give him this. He definitely wanted to prioritize money going back to his state, and we do appreciate him for that. We are short on time. Are there any last words or statements, Andy, that you want to give our audience before I turn it back over to Bruce?
No, I just want to say thank you for giving me the chance to talk with you and inviting me to be a part of the panel. You guys do great work. I always appreciate the chance to you and Bruce and your whole team. And, the more that the housing counseling industry can sort of work together and branch out and cover as broad a base across the Congress and the House and the Senate, the more effective we are. So thanks for the invitation today.
And thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bruce.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And I do want to say to Andy and to Melody that we're going to need to pay a lot of attention to these swing votes and the swing districts, in, especially in the House, but also in the Senate, where we've all been doing a lot of work. And we'll certainly coordinate, as we always do, on trying to get the message across on housing counseling funding. We'll also do some work on disaster recovery and are kind of making headway. Some of you who are on this call listening are part of our disaster recovery working group, and we're trying to get housing counseling more effectively integrated there into those programs and hopefully bring some funding along with it for counseling groups. And we'll take another run at the Housing Financial Literacy Act that would provide a discount for people on their mortgage insurance premiums on FHA loans if they work with a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. But got a lot in front of us, and I think we're going to close out with a very strong call here. Appreciate it, what everybody said. Do want to say special thanks to Lou Tisler for a shout out on membership dues. We've had a pretty good year. A few of you haven't renewed yet. Please do. It's kind of our lifeline, and it gives us the flexibility to do, especially the lobbying that we do. It's not tied to other funding, and really, really valuable. So please make sure, if you haven't joined yet, to join and to give us an opportunity. Melody, you have a thought.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me on membership. So to those who are on the call, NHRC is using a new system to solicit membership dues. So just keep an eye out in your inbox for an email around that. If you have any question on the amount that you owe for dues, just send me or Ellie an email and we'll be happy to help you with that.
Excellent, cool. Yeah, we're slowly and painfully moving to Salsa Labs, so you can see a higher quality in our emails so far. And Melody and Ellie have been sorting this out. I have to say I'm a little bit slower on the uptake, but I'll get there, I'm sure. So thanks for that. So we don't have another call scheduled until December 3rd. So there's a chance if some quick breaking stuff, we might jump in. But right now the plan is to do it December 3rd. Ellie, do you want to just quickly explain what the theme is on the call on December 3rd?
Sure. We are going to be talking about it's kind of a training for counseling around manufactured housing. Many of you may remember that back last year we had the folks from Next Step come on and talk about manufactured housing and the new world in manufactured housing and how much different the things that are being produced are. And so with that, it's also important to understand what the issues are around ensuring that people fully understand what they're getting into and what they're purchasing and what kind of loan product they're going to be getting into. So it has some specific counseling issues, and that's what we're going to be doing on December 3rd.
Excellent. Thanks so much. We look forward to all of you. Thanks for your good work out there in the field, and we're going to close this one out. Bye.